What's up guys, welcome back to another video on What If Deku Was the Avatar Part 2. Third time recording this, by the way, if anyone was wondering. So Deku had woken up after meeting Aang and Korra inside his mind space, I guess we'll call it for now, under the bridge in the alleyway. He ended up getting up and walking home. After walking home, he ate dinner with his mom and explained how his day went, leaving out the whole entire Avatar bit, as well as the sludge villain incident. Afterwards, he walked back into his room and went to bed, because he was heavily exhausted after trying to attempt meditation and going into the Avatar state for the first time earlier that day. Afterwards, he had woken up the next day and stretched and got out of bed, ate breakfast, and then told his mom that he was going to go train. Afterwards, he left the house and found a forest. He walked into the forest and found a nice, decent little clearing inside of it, and he started to meditate again, calling upon the previous earthbender before him. And blue energy enveloped him. As he opened his eyes, he saw a figure in front of him. The figure looked to be a female, with brown hair and a green kimono with red and white face paint on her face. And she introduced herself as Kyoshi. She said, "Hi, my name is Kyoshi. I was the previous earthbending avatar before you. And also I understand our situation, seeing how that peculiarly there are no benders in this time period. And that we need to practice earthbending, and I'm one of the few people who know earthbending the best because I was originally an earthbender." And Kyoshi then started training with Deku. They start off by lifting smaller pebbles. After they lift smaller pebbles, they ended up working up to slightly larger pebbles, which Deku found this more strength-oriented. So then Deku on the side started to work out to help assist with his endurance, because he knows that bending, after learning a couple lessons from Kyoshi, is partial martial arts as well as partially spirited oriented. So he has to know at least somewhat of a basis of martial arts to be able to perform bending. And martial arts is physically demanding, which Deku, to say the most, was physically lacking. So Deku ended up practicing his bending skills, and eventually, after about 2 months of bending, learned basic earth bending and mastered it. And Deku, by the end, was breathing heavily. And Kyoshi was like, "Excellent. Now time to work on sand bending." And Deku's like, breathing heavily in and out, and he's like, "Isn't sand just smaller rocks?" he says, and Kyoshi says, "Yes, it is. But the difference between sand bending and traditional earth bending is sand bending you more move compared to an airbender, rather than moving compared to regular earthbender." And Deku thinks for a moment, reminding himself that airbending is going to be the hardest bending type for him to learn, because it's the exact opposite of earthbending's philosophy. So he states, "But isn't airbending meant to be hyper difficult?" And Kyoshi's like, "Yes, but this is sand bending." And Deku gets more confused, and he's like, "Okay, so this is sand bending, and sand bending, you use air bending techniques in sand bending, or you fight like an airbender in sand bending." And Kyoshi's like, "Well, to be more accurate, it's more akin to a water airbender, where you use water-based techniques and airbending techniques because of the coarse sand." And Deku's like, "But wouldn't it still be more difficult because you're using airbending techniques?" And Kyoshi stops him, saying that, "No, the reason why airbending is going to be more difficult for you is because you're going to be a determined personnel, and you want to complete your task that you have set out for you. You don't want to move with the flow, I guess you could say." And Deku realizes that it wasn't the techniques that were going to be hard for him, it was the mental process, thinking about how personally he would bend the elements and how the mental thought goes into bending the elements. So Deku understands this, and he's like, "Okay, that makes sense." Afterwards, Deku starts bending sand, and he can only bend a little bit at the start, and basically can't even make a big enough thing to block a single small rock being chucked at him, a rock about the size of the palm of his hand. But eventually, he can bend entire, like, body mass of sand around, like it's nothing, after 2 weeks. And then Kyoshi's like, great. Now, I don't know the two newer forms of bending, which includes lava and lava and metal. For those, you're going to have to ask Ain and Korra for assistance. But you now know sand bending as well as earth bending, and you've mastered both. And you mastered it pretty quickly, seeing how I can only tell you and not physically show you because I cannot bend. Because I am, well, just the spirit of your past life. And Deku shakes his head up and down. Out of breath, and he's like, thank you for everything you have taught me, as he bows to Kyoshi. And Kyoshi says, no, thank you for letting me teach you, as she then disappears in front of Deku. Deku goes home that day and falls asleep. The next day, he walks out to the same area and does his basic training course that he has set up there, which is just some tires he had found for agility, as well as to flip them to work on strength and endurance, as well as running back and forth in between the tree clearing for better speed endurance, and basic push-ups and sit-ups. Afterwards, he called out Ain, and Ain says, "Hey, Deku, so you want to start your metal bending training?" And Deku goes, "Yeah, I do. How would I start the metal bending training?" he asks Ain. Ain responds, "Well, you kind of can't start it here," looking around in a forest. And Deku goes, "Why can't I start it here?" And Ain explains, "Well, there's no metal here." And then Deku pulls out his phone to see where there's an ample place, and then he reads Dekaba Beach on his phone. And he's like, "Well, there's this beach covered in trash, and if I go here, I can probably clean up the beach and practice metal bending." And Ain agrees, also stating that you can probably also practice lava bending there as well, seeing how there's a body of water nearby for protection. And Deku's like, "Score." So he starts walking his way down to the beach. When he arrived at the beach, he saw a small, skinnier man, and who was yellow hair and blue-eyed, as well as another man with yellow hair and blue eyes. And he thinks of them as father and son. And it looks like they were training. So Deku walks up to the man, who was obviously observing the younger personnel, who seemed to be about 2 to 3 years older than Deku, train. And he asks, "Hello, my name is Izuku Midoriya, and I was wondering if I could train here as well to practice for the UA entrance exam." And the man looks over at Deku, and because we know it's All Might, he introduces him as Tornoi. He introduces himself by his name. I can't remember All Might's name currently. And he thinks, "This is the boy I saw when I found the sludge villain. I saw how strong his quirk is. It would be dangerous to let him train out here alone." And then the man tells the boy, saying, "Well, you see, we got permission to train here. I feel like you should also get permission from the police before you can just train here on your own." And Deku's like, "Okay." And then the man asks, "So what is your quirk?" Because he only saw a portion of it. He only saw a weird sphere being circled by what seemed to be water, fire, and earth. And Deku explains, "I don't have a quirk." And then the man raises an eyebrow at Deku, saying, "But you just said that you wanted to train your quirk here." And Izuku holds up his hands and he's like, "Yes, technically it's not a quirk, but it's more relatable to a quirk." And the man's like, "This boy doesn't have a quirk, but I know he has a quirk. I've seen him use it before." And he's like, "Well, why don't you just explain to me what those not a quirk, but is a quirk is?" And Deku says, "It's not a quirk. See, I'm known as the Avatar. I'm the reincarnation of, well, the Avatar. I have the ability to control all 4 of the elements." including a fifth one that I technically cannot control currently until I master all 4 of the base ones. And All Might looks at Deku really confused, and he's like, what do you mean you can control all 4 of the elements? And Deku explains, well, there's water, fire, earth, and air, and I could control all 4 of those. And back a long time ago, there was known as the 4 nations, each one practiced a certain one. You had the Fire Nation, the Earth Kingdom, the Water Tribe, and the Air Nomads, all practicing different bending elements. And the Avatar was meant to keep balance between the 4 nations. And All Might's more passing this off as a kid's story. And he's like, I can introduce you to one of my past lives if you would like. And All Might raises an eyebrow at this again. He's like, you can introduce me to one of your past lives? And Deku explains, well, I know I can see him, and I don't know if you can. And then he puts his hand on All Might's shoulder and breathes in and out calmly as he summons Ain in front of him. And he's like, hello, my name is Ain. I was the avatar before Izuku here. And I'm an air nomad. As All Might sees this, he can't get shocked. And Mirio, which is the other personnel there, kind of sees All Might being shocked and a boy touching him. But he doesn't see Ain there because he doesn't have a physical connection to Deku, who is touching him. And he explains that what the avatar is and how it's based and how it's bending and not quirks, which allow him control to all 4 of the elements. And All Might now is starting to believe this a little bit more. And then he calls over Mirio, and Deku asks, and then, not Deku, All Might asks if Deku can do the same thing with Mirio, to show Mirio what it was. And Deku explains, yes, he can, and I can also bring out a different personnel, rather than Aang this time. And he does it with Mirio and All Might still being there, so All Might can mean the other one. And then he brings out Korra. And Korra states, so y'all think that my guy going insane. Especially you, All Might. As Toronoshi kind of coughs up some blood, being shocked. As Deku, mouth drops, and Mirio's kind of like shocked as well. As he just really is surprised that this thing can instantaneously tell that All Might is All Might even in his small form. And then Ain also pops out because Deku summoned Ain as well. Or Ain was still there from last time. And then Ain kind of elbows Korra in the gut again, saying, you weren't meant to say that was All Might. Obviously, he was trying to keep it a secret, or he would have introduced himself as All Might. And Korra's like, well, how was I meant to know that? I'm just here to help out Izuku. I don't care about All Might. As Deku looks towards Toroshi, as he knows him, and asks, is that true? Are you All Might? And All Might's like, yes, I am All Might. He's like, wait, what? How? Wait, All Might looks way different than you. How are you All Might? And All Might explains about his injury a couple years ago and how it is. And then Deku also summons out Kyoshi, because Kyoshi is like one Deku is more closer with Kyoshi. And then Kyoshi summons out and he's like, she's like, hello, Izuku. It's been only a day. You should be learning metal bending. Why did you summon me out? And Deku's like, I don't know. I just want us to be together. And then Kyoshi kind of looks towards the 2 other personnel and she's like, who are these other 2 personnel? And then Deku goes, well, that's Toroshi, or All Might. He explains to her, telling her that he's All Might. And then he says that he doesn't know the other boy's name. And the other boy introduces himself as Mirio. Afterwards, Deku wishes all the previous lives that you just summoned up for no other reason goodbye and hope they had a fun time just chilling. And Ain's like, don't worry, we will. Yeah, and it's kind of weird when we just chill. Yep. As they all 3 just disappear. Afterwards, Mirio and All Might are both stunned by what had just unfolded in front of them. They had just seen this boy summon up past lives, and apparently he doesn't have a quirk. He has this thing called bending, as well as he's a reincarnation. And All Might kind of thinks, well, this is kind of similar to One for All. But, it's kind of not either. Because, yes, there's other carriers, and a portion of the other carriers are passed on, but this boy can actually communicate. Maybe after some time, One for All's previous users can communicate with the future ones. Kind of like how this boy can, and learn wisdom from them. All Might's kind of intrigued by this idea. And then Mirio pulls All Might aside, and he's like, it seems similar to the vestiges I seen. Remember when I told you how I saw vestiges after a month? And All Might kind of thinks, yeah, you did. Maybe eventually you'll have the same capability that this boy has, where he can talk to his previous lives. Maybe you can meet the first and second user, or the third user. Afterwards, Deku chimes back in saying, now can I use the beach, please? And All Might gives, because All Might knows that, A, this can go very bad if he doesn't, but he also states that he has to fight Mirio as well, beforehand. And Deku's like, but why would I have to fight him? And All Might says, well, see, now you're going to be training here. I might as well train you as well as Mirio, because you seem like you could be very strong, especially with controlling 4 different elements, and I figured it would be smart to train you as well. And then afterwards, Deku gets in a fighting stance, and he's like, okay. And you gotta remember, Deku does know slight martial arts. He knows earthbending, which is, I'm pretty sure, Taekwondo inspired. Is earthbending Taekwondo? I don't know. Earthbending is inspired by martial arts, and I'm just going to frame it as Taekwondo in this fashion, which mainly specializes in kicks. For some reason, I always imagine Earthbender as being kick-oriented. But Mirio gets prepared, and Mirio thinks like, well, this boy can bend the elements, but really, when I can just phase through all of his attacks, it shouldn't be an issue. So Mirio starts attacking Deku, and he phases out. And Deku sees his clothes on his floor, and he's like, where did he go? Now out of nowhere, he gets punched by a naked Mirio, popping up out of the ground, laughing, saying, yeah, that's my quirk. I can go through things if I hold my breath. And Deku's like, okay, so that's your ability. Deku then, using the sand around him, creates a massive sand cloud by covering the entire area, using it so he can move around freely while Mirio has obstructed vision, as well as a hard time breathing, because he would have to close his mouth or he can't get through. During that time, Deku also constructs like a sand armor, like how Gaara uses in Naruto, creating sand armor to mainly protect himself against Mirio's punches, because he knows that Mirio is stronger than him, because he's been toning his body more than Deku has. Afterwards, he quickly forces the sand all around Mirio, because he uses seismic sense to tell where Mirio is, which he picked up that skill from Kyoshi, who learned it from Ain after Ain was recollecting his events, because they're all one person, and at that point their consciousness more or less gets transferred from person to person, learning the memories. Afterwards, Deku quickly forces himself out by basically levitating the sand below him, sending him up into the air, keeping a grounded perspective though, so he can still use seismic sense. Afterwards, he creates a sand tentacle, which he rips out and sends it flying towards Mirio, which strikes Mirio in the side, knocking him sideways. And now that Mirio was out of the sand cloud, he can now see where Deku's at, and he sees that Deku has surrounded his arms in sand, creating 2 tentacle sand-like appendages, like how waterbenders do sometimes. Mirio then uses permanation to go under the ground. And Deku thinks he's safe because he's on a sand pillar, but then he senses something going up through the sand pillar, and Deku gets punched in the back of the head again by Mirio, sending him flying off the sand pillar, and then he cushions himself using the sand and creating a hand to basically soften his fall as he stands back up. Then Deku uses his sand tentacle and whips it at Mirio. Mirio uses permeation to dodge, which then Deku laughs at by cuffing both of Mirio's feet with the sand holding him in place, as then he fires another one, and this time Mirio also dodges using permeation and goes under the ground. Deku then uses seismic step, and since Mirio can't see, Deku then creates a hole all in the ground, multiple holes, because he figures that he's forced to take a breath because he has to hold his breath, so why don't we give him some spots to hold his breath? After creating multiple holes, Deku then used seismic steps again to see that Mirio is now inside one of the holes after taking a breath because he has no clue where he is at because he constantly falls down until he takes a breath, which sends him flying upwards. So he finds himself in a hole, which then Deku uses basically sand to trap Mirio inside by hitting him once. Afterwards, Mirio moves again by holding his breath again, sending him up, but this time he doesn't get caught in any holes and gets sent out of the air. As soon as he gets out, Deku quickly whiplashes him with the whip because he knew where he was coming up thanks to seismic steps, sending Mirio flying. Mirio regains himself and comes running back at Deku. By this point, Deku had already created multiple different traps inside the stand, making permeation a way more of a danger than it is to an actual success. Afterwards, Deku just wraps Mirio's legs in sand, causing him to fall again. And then covers Mirio with sand, basically sand trapping him. And then his sand armor he basically puts it away because by that point he had won. All Might declares Deku the winner for being able to actually trap Mirio, as well as using multiple clever techniques to fight against Mirio on the split second. And All Might thinks, wow, this kid, after only knowing one element and only using sand, because he can't even use metal or lava or water bending, which all were at his fingertips by that point, he couldn't really use earth bending because the closest slab of earth was kind of deep below the ground, and he doesn't feel like picking it up when sand bending is pretty easy. Not to mention he had mastered it by that point. But Deku was pretty out of energy, so Deku falls flat on his butt as soon as he gets the dub. And he's deeply gasping. He's like, that's a pretty good fight. And Mirio isn't even really out of breath. He just understands that at this point, if Deku even was a villain, at this point he would be a hyper dangerous villain at that. Like, not even with all four elements, he would be dangerous. And now he starts to understand why All Might was like, yeah, you can train with us. Afterwards, Deku takes a deep breath, and it's around noon. And Deku says he's going to go train over here because he's going to work on metal bending, and he needs practice for it. And All Might is like, so what all types of bending can you do? And Deku explains, well, there are... My bad. That's my bad. I'm sorry. My phone shifted it upwards. That's my bad. And Deku explains that there's 4 different types of bending. You have earth, water, fire, and air. And All Might's like, yes, I understand the 4 base elements, but you were just manipulating sand, which sand, yes, it being earth, and then you said you're going to go practice metal bending, which metal bending isn't earth, though. Metal is metal and earth is earth. And Deku's like, oh, you want to know about the advanced technique of bending? And All Might's like, yes, that's it. And Deku then explains, well, in earth bending, you can bend earth, metal, sand, and lava. And All Might hears the last one, and he kind of goes, lava? You can bend lava? And Deku says, yes, but lava's more akin to water bending, just like how sand bending's more akin to air bending. But I kind of mixed it with a water bending technique to make the tentacle ability, as well as basic earth bending techniques like earth prisons. And All Might's kind of surprised by this, because he's like, wow, that's pretty versatile. And Deku's like, oh yeah, but that's only one. The next bending element I'm going to learn is fire. And All Might's like, fire is going to be his very heavy damaging one. And then Deku explains, and fire allows me to do combustion bending. And All Might's like, combustion bending, what's that? And Deku explains combustion bending is basically the ability to create explosions from a range. And All Might's like, wow, and I thought his fire bending was bad, but now he can create explosions and lightning bending. And All Might once again is like, what? You can explode with lightning? Yeah, fire bending is definitely my most destructive bending type, and is probably the most important one I get under control. I can also redirect lightning, so if anyone has an electric or lightning-based quirk, I can redirect it back at them. And All Might's just still surprised by the lightning bending. Like, that's pretty scary, especially how quickly lightning travels, and how quickly people are going to be dead when that travels and hits them. And then Deku explains, after that, we have airbending. And airbending has two different types of bending. You have traditional airbending, and you have spirit bending. And All Might goes, so airbending just lets you bend air. Can you fly? And Deku explains, I don't know. See, I think flying would be easy, and I could probably fly if I create my own airbending technique, but I don't know. And spirit bending basically lets me do that. And All Might ask, okay, what does spirit bending let you do? And spirit bending has only one technique, Deku explains, and then this technique is called astral projection. It lets him to project himself, his spirit, out of his body and communicate with other spirits, as well as explore the area away from him. And All Might's kind of impressed by this as well, and he's like, wow, that would be great for rescue missions. And Deku's like, yep. And then All Might's like, what's your last one? And Deku explains that my last one is known as waterbending. And waterbending is the most versatile one, being able to manipulate multiple different things. And All Might thinks, yeah, that makes sense. And Deku starts off saying, well, there's waterbending. Obviously allows me to manipulate water. As well as ice bending, where I can manipulate ice. Steam bending, which lets me manipulate steam. And also spirit healing bending. And healing bending in general. And All Might's like, spirit healing? I can understand healing, but spirit healing? How do you heal spirits? And Deku's like, well, to be more accurate, it's not really heal spirits, it's more of like uncorrupts spirits. And All Might's like, corrupts? And Deku's like, I don't really understand it myself. I haven't really talked with Korra that much, and Korra is more of the major here on spirit bending. But I also know there is spirit healing as well as spirit destruction. And All Might looks towards Deku and he's like, spirit destruction? And Deku explains, yes, I can destroy spirits after I learned that technique. And that includes human spirits as well. And All Might thinks, you can completely destroy a spirit of a human? That sounds a little bit villainous. And Deku explains, well, that's not even the most villainous one. That one's coming up next. And All Might's like, that's not even the worst one? No. The worst one is known as bloodbending. And All Might's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense why it's worse. But how can it get worse than destroying your spirit? And Deku explains, well, think of it as like making people my puppet in general. And I can control them and make them do whatever I want. As well as physically suck the blood out of them until they're nothing more of an empty husk. And that's why it's known as the dark art of bending. There are multiple different water bending arts, because really water bending is the darkest form of bending out of all the bending arts. And All Might's kind of impressed by this, and he's like, wow, you can become a very strong hero. And Deku's like, yes, I know, but my job is not to be a hero, it's meant to be a bringer of balance. And All Might says, what's the difference? And Deku explains, my goal is not to just protect one country. It's to protect the entire world. So I have to bring balance to the entire world, making sure no single group gets too much stronger than the other. That is the job of the Avatar. And All Might thinks, so this guy's going to be a hero villain? And Deku explains, but I'm still going to go to UA and get my hero license and stuff. And All Might's like, well, let's hope we can change his ideas in the time he's in UA for like 4 years. Because if not, this is going to be a horrible situation when this guy gets out. And afterwards, Deku then walks away, as All Might wishes him luck with training metal bending. Deku summons Ain, and Ain and Deku train metal bending for 2 weeks. Afterwards, Deku kind of learns metal bending and understands how to do it. And then he then goes to bed and summons out Korra. He has another fight with Mirio, but this time Mirio takes the win after learning Deku's basic gimmicks with sand bending and understanding how it works. After summoning out Korra, Korra starts to explain that she does not know lava bending, but she can attempt to teach Deku lava bending in a sense. And she explains that lava bending is more akin to a water bending, but with lava rather than water. So like how sand bending, you had to use air bending techniques to understand it, water bending is the same, as she explains this to him. Deku shakes his head down and starts to work with lava bending. He can only manipulate it to a small degree currently, but after about 4 weeks, he's ended up being able to manipulate it to a decent enough degree to where he could probably stop a volcano eruption. Like, cool off all the lava and push it back down into the volcano to save everyone. So Deku ends up making a lava ball, and he ends up adding more and more to it as a final exam. And this lava ball is really, really big. And All Might and Muriel see this, and they run over asking Deku, "What are you doing, bro? Why do you have a lava ball that big? Where did the lava ball come from?" And Deku explains, "Well, you know how there's tons of cars here, right?" And All Might and Muriel look around to see no cars anywhere around Deku. And he explains that he had turned all the cars into lava and then burnt up all the extra objects to help clean up the beach quicker. And All Might's like, "Okay, yeah, we need to get rid of the lava ball." And Deku starts cooling off the water lava ball. And then Korra's like, "Why don't you just put it in the water?" And Deku's like, "That's a great idea." And then All Might's like, "What do you mean, what's a great idea?" And he's like, "Nothing. Korra just suggested an excellent idea to me." As Deku starts lowering this still piping hot. It's still mostly solid now, but it's piping hot into the water as a bunch load of steam just starts erupting off of it, sending almost everyone flying back because of the pure amount of heat that's erupting off, except for Deku, who has a more of an advanced heat tolerance thanks to him also being a firebender. After dumping the ball in the water, he takes it out and then hardens it down into a cube and then sets the cube onto the sand. And All Might tells Deku, "Do not do that again. That is very dangerous. Do not do it again." And Deku goes, "Okay, yes, sir. My bad." As Deku thinks, "I'm getting yelled at for using a bending element." Well, that sucks. Even though he does understand how dangerous it is. And then afterwards, some police arrive because people were reporting the massive amount of steam, and All Might buffs up just saying that it was quirk practice that some kids were doing and that he had already reprimanded them for using their quirks out in public, yada yada yada. Even though Mirio and Deku did get reprimanded. He got yelled at by All Might for creating a lava ball so stupidly big. But that was about all. And then Korra tells him that, yeah, he's mastered all of Earth. Now it'd probably be best for you to talk to Roku. And Deku raises one of his eyebrows, and he's like, "Roku?" And Korra explains that Roku is a firebender, the firebending avatar, the avatar before Ain, and that Deku should learn firebending from Roku because Roku can also do energy bending, but he does not know combustion bending. None of the avatars do. And that's where I'm going to leave it off with. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button. And until next time, goodbye.